All right, we are now live. Mr. Chair, you may proceed.
Okay, thank you, Derek. Good evening and welcome to our first ever virtual Committee of Adjustment meeting. Now, on that note, I'd like to thank the staff and acknowledge all their efforts to make this meeting possible. Just 1 month ago, there were no processes in place to hold a virtual public meeting, and 4 weeks later, here we are. So now we have many staff members with us this evening who are working behind the scenes to make this meeting possible. Our Secretary Treasurer is Anna Maria Eusebio, and our clerks, James Thompson and Derek O'Shea, are our meeting hosts. So they're authorized to interrupt the meeting as the need arises. Now, the agenda and schedules for this meeting have been posted on Dash on the city's website. And if you don't have those documents and you want to follow along, then please feel free to access them now. We have a really heavy agenda tonight with, I think, 15 agenda items comprising 23 file numbers. Now, while there is a lot to go through, I'd like to share with you the format that I'm going to be using to navigate through each application. I'm going to start by introducing the application. And I'll be calling on each applicant or their agent and give them an opportunity to add anything further to the application. If you have nothing further to add, then simply say that you don't have anything further to add. Next, what I'm going to do is to invite the committee members to ask questions of either the applicant or staff. Then I'll open the public portion of the meeting. It's at that time that I'll invite you, if you're the public, to raise your virtual hand in Zoom if you have any questions or comments that you wish to make in respect of any application. Now, if you have a question or make a comment, please don't expect an immediate answer because it's during the public portion of the meeting that we're going to be recording your questions and comments. And only after I close the public portion of the meeting will your questions and comments be addressed by the applicant or their agent or staff members. Now, to be sure, I'm going to call 3 times for public comments before I close the public portion of the meeting, just to be sure everybody has a fair chance to navigate through the technology. Next, I'm going to invite the applicant or staff to comment on the comments that were raised during the public portion. And then finally, I'm going to be turning to the committee for a motion and deliberation and an opportunity to have a vote on the application. After that, if you're an applicant or the agent, you can feel free to leave the meeting. And then what we do is we rinse and we repeat. And for the next 15 meetings or 15 applications we have coming up. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Now, if you have a personal interest in any particular application and you'd like to receive written notice of tonight's decision, then please send an email with your name and your address to our Secretary Treasurer, Anna Maria Eusebio. Her email address is aeusebio@cityofkingston.ca. So I'll now call the meeting to order at 5:37 p.m. and I'll refer you to the agenda. So committee members, can I call on somebody to move approval of the agenda? And if you could do that by raising your hand. Yeah, so moved by Vincent and seconded by Paul.
Mr. Chair, very quickly, I'll just note that Mr. Chair, I just asked that the 2 items be approved as well through the approval of the agenda.
Oh, two new items?
Oh, sorry, just the 2 addendums that were circulated. If we could just amend the agenda to include the addendum. I see Mr. Babbins agreeing, as is the seconder.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Yes, we had those. Okay, I do have those down. And what specific items do they refer to? I had one for item number N, 28 Mahlon Street. And the other addendum, we'll just add for the record. Paul or Vincent or James, could you give me that?
Bear with me for 2 seconds.
Okay, sure.
Sure. The initial addendum was distributed on Friday, and it relates to the exhibits for 339 and 343 College Street. Actually, yes. Sorry, that was the addendum released today, but nonetheless, the matter is 339 and 343 College Street. And then, just 1 second.
And then there was one piece of correspondence for 1525 Clover Street.
Yes.
Okay.
And then, as you outlined, the initial addendum related to 28 Maitland Street.
Okay. All right. Okay, so look for approval of the agenda as amended, moved by Vincent and seconded by Paul. All in favor, raise your hands. And that would be unanimously carried. Okay, are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest this evening? If not, shake your head no. I don't see, Somnath is not here at this point, correct? Okay, so all right, there are no disclosures of pecuniary interest. I've pre-confirmed there are no delegations this evening, and there are no requests for deferral, and nor are there any returning deferred items. So with that, I'd like to move on to our first piece of new business, which is application item number 7A, which is an application for minor variance, file number D13050-2019, and the address is 14 Garrett Street. Anna Marie, could I have you introduce that, please?
Hello, good evening. The application is for 14 Garrett Street. The purpose and effect of the application is to seek relief from select regulations of zoning bylaw 8499 in order to facilitate the development of a 4-story mixed-use commercial residential building with at-grade parking. I leave this in your hands.
Thank you. And if you're following along on the agenda package that's all compiled, you'll file it on the you will find it on PDF page number 8. Okay, do we have the applicant or their agent here? And can I ask them to identify themselves by raising their virtual hand and identify themselves and their address for the record, please?
Mr. Chair, perhaps we'll begin with Mark Howe, and then I think the other agent or applicant would like to speak after him.
Okay, Mark Allen.
Or sorry, Mark Howe.
Yes, hello, it's Mark Tao. I'm a planner with the IBI group here in Kingston.
Thank you.
The
And sorry.
Oh, go ahead. I'm the planner, the agent for the applicant, and the owner, Ali Malou, or the owner's representative, is also here today.
Okay. Okay. Is there anything further you want to add to the application before us?
Nope, no, the staff reports captures everything, and no issues with the conditions and variances all seem accurate. Just thanks to staff for working through a more complex variance than usual.
Great. Okay, good. Okay, now I'll turn it over to the committee members. Do you have any question for either the applicant, their agent, or for staff? Nothing? Oh, Paul, I see your virtual hand. Yep, Paul.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have actually 2 questions, and maybe these are to staff. I'm not sure. But variance number 10 concerning the height of the parapet, the architectural details. There wasn't a drawing or a rendering that I could distinguish from the package. And I'm just wondering if staff or the applicant possibly could describe what that is. And the second piece is to do with, has there been any correspondence from the community expressing either approval or support or negative comments about this project? Thank you.
Good, thanks.
So I can speak to the first question. So with this building, there's proposed to be some rooftop amenity area. So if you look at the drawing package, probably the best example or best drawing is A501, which is the last page, which if you're looking at the agenda package for this one, it's page 23 of 32.
Okay, so if you add 8 to 23, it'll be on page 31 of the PDF package.
So we got A501. So essentially, because there's rooftop amenity area, there may be railings or other types of architectural features that are necessary on the rooftop. And out of abundance of caution, we asked for a variance to make sure that if we had to put railings up and they happen to be outside of the allowed angular plane, that they would be allowed still. So we're moving to site plan at this point, and that's usually at the site plan stage where we have that more detailed information about what may go on the rooftop. But that's the gist of it. No additional buildings or anything, or a livable floor space beyond that.
Mr. Chair, if I may, no correspondence was received regarding this matter, and I'd also note that Mr. Barr, who is the staff planner, would like to provide comment.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Barr.
Good evening, everyone. My name is James Barr. I'm the planner with the City of Kingston who worked on this application. I have nothing further to add actually at this point. Mr. Tao adequately pointed out the drawing I was going to regarding the parapet, and Mr. Thompson covered the correspondence.
Good, thank you. Okay, any other questions from committee members? Okay, I see none. So at this point now, I'll open the public portion of the meeting. So are there any members of the public here today who wish to speak to the application for 14 Garrett Street? If you could please raise your virtual hand and we'll get to you. So calling once. And so again, if there are any members of the public here who are interested in the application for 14 Garrett Street, and you wish to make a presentation, or if you have a question or concern, please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. And I'll call for a third and final time. If there are any members of the public here who wish to speak to the application for 14 Garrett Street, please raise your virtual hand. And I'm seeing none, so I'll close the public portion of the meeting and actually come back to the committee members for a motion and then maybe a discussion. Okay, Vincent? You can turn your mic on. Okay, so are you?
A motion to approve.
Okay. So moved by Vincent and seconded by Paul. Any discussion on that? So all in favor, raise your hand. And that is unanimously carried. Thank you very much. And if you're the applicant, you're certainly free to leave. Thank you. Just bear with us while we just record some information here. Okay, so are we ready, Anne Marie?
Yes, thank you. The second application is for consent and minor variance, file number D10-050-2019 and D13-068-2019 for 339 and 343 College Street. The owners are Albert D'Souza and Marilyn D'Souza and Paul Newhouse, and the applicant is Paul Newhouse. The purpose and effect of the minor variance application is to increase building depth, decrease side yard setback, and decrease aggregate side yard setback to facilitate a 18.2 square meter addition at the rear of the existing attached garage and to facilitate the enclosure of an existing front porch. The property is also subject to an application for consent under the Planning Act. The purpose and effect of the consent application is to request an easement to permit the existing eaves encroachment from 343 College Street onto the side yard of 339 College Street. I leave this in your hands.
Thank you. And you'll find this on page 40 of the agenda package, the PDF version of it. All right, so I'd like to call on the applicant at this point to identify themselves and or their agent, identify themselves by name and their address, please.
Paul Newhouse, 343 College Street.
Okay. Anybody else or just Mr. Newhouse? Okay, just Mr. Newhouse then. So Mr. Newhouse, thanks for being here. Do you have anything further you want to add to the application we have before us?
I believe everything's in the file. The latest engineer report was submitted a few weeks ago that addresses the addendum that was just received about an hour ago regarding drainage. That was addressed in the engineer's report. So no, nothing further to add at this point. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. All right, so committee members, do you have any questions for the applicant or for staff? And I see Paul. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is for staff. I'm looking at variance number 1, where it's the maximum permitted residential building depth. And I'm just wondering, would this be consistent with other residents in the area, this variance? Thank you.
I believe the planner, Ms. Robideau, has raised her hand. Megan, I've unmuted your microphone as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, Derek. In regards to the variance for maximum permitted residential building depth, the subject property is located in the A zone of zoning bylaw 8499. And in the A zone, maximum permitted residential building depth is determined by calculating the average building depth of both of the neighboring properties. So the required building depth that's noted here, 10.6 meters, is in fact the average building depth of the dwellings on either side of the subject property.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Megan. And Paul, or I'm sorry, Vincent, you had a question?
Yeah, it was more about the correspondence that was received with this about like drainage issues and possibly draining into like some of the rear yard neighbors. Is there anything in place that makes it so that there's certain procedures that they follow to make sure that none of that happens? Just curious.
Okay.
Are you
Megan?
addressing it to me? Sorry.
Oh, I guess it's more for staff, I guess.
Oh.
Megan, you had your hand up. Were you going to address that?
Sure, I can address the question, and then if the applicant has anything to add, he's welcome to do so. Within the recommendation report that has been provided, you'll find in Exhibit H, there's a letter that the applicant has provided from a licensed professional engineer, which details the drainage review and a grading and drainage plan for the proposal. And then further to that, in Exhibit H on the following page, you'll see the drainage plan that's been provided by the applicant. So in our technical review of this application, staff in the building department required the applicant to provide a drainage plan to demonstrate that there would be no adverse impacts in terms of drainage on neighboring or adjacent properties. And so the applicant has done so to building staff's satisfaction with the submission of this letter and the drainage plan. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Megan. And Mr. Newhouse, did you have something you wanted to add?
I just wasn't sure if that question was being directed to me. So Megan said it very well. So.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, committee members, any further questions of the applicant or staff? Okay, no, I see none. All right, so on that note, I'm going to open the public portion of the meeting. So are any members here, or any public members here this evening who wish to speak to application for 339 and 343 College Street? If so, please raise your virtual hand. Again, if any members of the public are here this evening to speak to the application for the address 339, 343 College Street, could you please raise your virtual hand in Zoom? And I'll make my third and final call. Any members of the public here to speak to the application for 339, 343 College Street, please raise your virtual hand. And I don't see any. So what I'll do is I'll come back to the committee members and ask for a motion.
Mr. Chair, very quickly, I believe Ms. Robideau from staff has her hand raised again. So we'll
I'm sorry. I see that now. Thank you, Ms. Robideau.
I thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we go to motion, I just want to note that the file number that is noted on the meeting agenda for the minor variance application D13 0068 2019 should in fact read D13 067 2019.
2019. Okay, thank you for that. And I'm assuming that those changes have been made on your end on this ultimate decision?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. Okay, I don't see any other hands, so I'll now go back to motion. So moved by Paul, yep, and seconded by Vincent, and any discussion on that? So all in favor, raise your hands visually. Thank you. And that's unanimously carried. Thank you very much. And the applicant, you're certainly free to leave the meeting now. Okay, our next agenda item is number 7C, which is an application for minor variance. And Anna Marie?
Hello.
Yep.
The third item is an application for a minor variance, file number D13 068-2019 for 457 College Street. The owner is Jane Howe and Peter Ellis. The applicant is Peter Ellis. The purpose and effect of the application is to increase the building depth of the primary building and decrease the rear yard and side yard setbacks of an accessory building, to construct a 2-story addition at the rear of the existing single detached dwelling and construct a 3 square meter addition on the legal non-complying detached garage. I leave this in your hands.
Thank you very much. And you'll find this on page 75 of the PDF version, if you want to follow along. Okay, so I'm going to call on the applicant. If you could identify yourself by name and address, please. So
Bear with me one moment here, Mr. Chair. I'm just trying to unmute the applicant.
sure. I can see he's here, so.
Yeah, I'm just having some. Oh, there we go. So you're now
Go
live,
ahead,
Mr. Ellis.
Yes, hi there. Yes, it's Peter Ellis, 457 College Street.
Okay, Mr. Ellis, thank you for being here. Is there anything further you wish to add to the application this evening?
No, there's nothing to add beyond what's in the report that's been filed.
Very good. All right, so I'll turn it over to the committee members and ask if you have any questions of either the applicant or staff. Mr. Babin, Paul?
Yeah, thank you. This is actually to staff. I could not find a rendering of the garage structure. So is it possible to explain what is the 3 square meter addition and how close is that to the property line? Thank you.
Thank you. And staff? Okay, Megan?
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so the applicant is requesting relief for rear and side yard setbacks for the location of the existing accessory structure on the lot, which is the existing garage. The existing garage has legal non-complying status for its rear and side yard setbacks. The applicant is proposing a very small 3 square meter addition on the north side of the garage. But in order to make these alterations to the legal non-compliant garage, they do require a minor variance for rear yard and side yard setbacks of that garage, which is an existing condition.
So supplemental, Mr. Chair, has there been any concerns raised by the neighbors with this addition? Thank you.
Megan?
Thank you. We have not received any correspondence from neighbors or otherwise on this application.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the committee have questions for the applicant or staff? Okay, I don't see any. So now I'll open up the public portion of the meeting. Are any members of the public here this evening to speak to application for 457 College Street? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom.
Mr. Chair, I'll just reiterate that for the members of the public that wish to raise their hand in Zoom, if they click on the participants button on the bottom menu of their screen, then that will bring the right column up on their screen, which includes the raise hand function. And that's just for folks that may have joined the meeting after our initial briefing earlier.
Very good. Thanks for that. Okay, calling twice. Are any members of the public here this evening who wish to speak to the application for 457 College Street? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. And my third and final call, are there any members of the public here this evening who wish to speak to application for 457 College Street? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. And I'm seeing none, so I'll now close the public portion of the meeting, and I'll come back to the committee members and ask for a motion and discussion. All right, Vincent? Yep, do you wish to move?
Yeah, I'll move.
Okay, so moved by Vincent and seconded by Paul. Any discussion on that? All right, so all in favor, raise your hands. And that's unanimously carried. Thank you very much. And so the applicant, you're free to go. Thank you. Okay, our next agenda item is number 7D, which is an application for a minor variance. Anna Maria, could you take this over?
Hello, the application is for a minor variance for file number D13-048-2019 for 449 Princess Street. The owner is Kingston Terminal Properties Limited, and the applicant is also Kingston Terminal Properties Limited and Foten Consultants. The purpose and effect of the application is to request a reduction in the required number of parking spaces, their dimensions and locations to facilitate the conversion of the 6-story office building to a mixed-use commercial and residential building. I leave this in your hands.
Thank you very much. And for those who want to follow along, you'll find it on page 101 of the compiled PDF for this. So can I please ask the applicant and or their agent to identify themselves for the public record, please? Their name and address.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. My name is Mike Keene, and I'm a land use planner with Foten Consultants in Kingston. And I'm here on behalf of Kingston Terminal Properties. And I did notice that Mr. Brian Springer is also signed in.
Okay, and does Mr. Springer wish to add anything? I don't see a hand raised, so that's okay.
I was just pointing out that he as the owner is also signed in.
Very good, thank you. Okay, thanks for that, Mr. Keene. All right, so I'll turn this over to the committee members. Do you have any questions for the applicant or for staff? And Paul?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a little concern with variance number 1 concerning the number of available parking spaces going from 1 parking space to 0.5. And I'm just wondering, in the area, this is the staff, is there similar projects with a similar variance awarded in recent times? I'm supportive of this. I'm just wondering, if so, should there be an amendment to our actual bylaw and going forward? I mean, the reasons in the case were very, very clear, but I just wondered if there's any other projects in the area with a similar variance awarded. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. I see Mr. Keene had his hand raised.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, I'd be pleased to respond to that question. The applications that are before the committee tonight are consistent with every application that has moved forward in Williamsville, which is a request for reduction to half a space per unit for the residential, and then the 1 space for 150 square meters of commercial rather than 1 to 128. So that would be, I think I myself have probably worked on about 8 applications with those same changes, but that's just speaking of applications Foten's worked on, amongst others, would have the same request.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. And Mr. Waleed, you had a question or a comment as well?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Park also had his hand up first, so perhaps we'll go to him.
Okay, yep, for sure. Mr. Park?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Further to Mr. Keene's comments, yes, I agree with, there have been numerous examples, especially in the downtown and inner harbor area, of reduced parking standards where we're seeing higher density proposals coming in. And in fact, I think Mr. Babin's question was, is the city looking at reducing those standards? We are currently working on a study that will ultimately bring forward recommendations for reduced parking standards in certain parts of the city so that in the future, variances like this will not be required. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Albuquerque, did you want to comment as well? Your hand had been up. No, okay, then that's fine. All right, any other questions from the committee members to the staff or the applicant? Okay, and I don't see any. So now I'll open the public portion of the meeting. Are there any members of the public here this evening who wish to speak to the application for 449 Princess Street? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. And I'll call for a second time. Are there any members of the public here this evening who wish to speak to the application for 449 Princess Street? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. And just by way of clarification, Derek, will I see their raised hand under attendees?
That is correct, Mr. Chair. I'm
Okay.
also monitoring it and have not seen
Good.
any hands raised, but we'll bring
Got
it to your attention if it happens.
Good, thank you. All right, and I'll call one third and final time. Are there any members of the public here who wish to speak to the application for 449 Princess Street? Please raise your virtual hand. And I don't see any, so I'll now close the public portion of the meeting and we'll come back to the committee for a motion. So Paul? So moved by Paul and seconded by Vincent, okay. Any discussion? So all in favor, raise your hands. And that's unanimously carried. Thank you. So the applicant, you can go. Thank you very much for being here. Okay, so the next item on our agenda is item number 7E, which is an application for minor variance, file number D13-004-2020. Anna Marie?
Hello, the address is 827 Woodbine Road and the owner and applicant is Martin Smith. The purpose and effect of the application is to reduce the minimum side yard requirements. The effect would be to allow the conversion of the garage into habitation space. This would result in a larger area for a second dwelling unit in the basement. No changes to the exterior dimensions of the house are proposed. Vehicle parking will be located on the existing driveway. I leave this in your hands.
Thank you very much. And you'll find this on page 122 of the PDF package. So I'd like the applicant, if you could, to please identify yourself by name and address, applicant and or agent.
Hello, this is Martin Smith, 827 Woodbine.
Okay. And Mr. Smith, thanks for being here. Is there anything further you want to add to the application?
Nope, it should all be in the application provided.
Okay, that's good. All right, so then I'll turn it over to the committee members. Do you have any questions of either the applicant or staff? No, I see some head shaking, so that's no questions. So I'll now open the public portion of the meeting. Are any members of the public here this evening to speak to 827 Woodbine Road? Please raise your hand. Virtual hand, that is, in Zoom. And I'll call number 2. Are there any members of the public here this evening who wish to speak to application for 827 Woodbine Road? Please raise your hand. And my third and final call, are there any public members with us this evening who wish to speak to the application for 827 Woodbine Road? Please raise your virtual hand. And I see none, so I'll close the public portion of the meeting and come back to the committee for a motion and recommendation. So Paul, moved by Paul. Okay, and seconded by Vincent. Okay. Any discussion on that? So all in favor, raise your hand. And that would be unanimously carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And the applicant, you're free to leave. Thanks for being here. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is item number 7F, which is an application for consent. Anna Maria, can I get you to introduce this for us, please?
Thank you. The application for consent is for 163 Union Street. The owner is Magdalene Karkulis. The applicant is Photen Consultants. The purpose and effect of the two consent applications are to facilitate the creation of two new residential lots. One lot will have 11.5 meters of frontage on Union Street. The second lot will have 10.9 meters of frontage on Albert Street, and the retained lot will contain the existing house. I will like to move this over to Lindsay Statham, who is the planner on this file. I believe we've received some correspondence with respect to this file.
Yes, thank you. Lindsay?
Hi there, this is Lindsay. I'm the planner on the file, and we have received an additional piece of correspondence. It was provided to James and Anne Marie.
Yep. And I did get that. Committee members, did you also receive that? Okay, we did receive that. Thank you very much. Okay, so committee members, or actually I'll call for the applicant to identify themselves by name and address, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. My name is Yuko Leclerc. I'm a land use planner with Photen Planning and Design, and I am here this evening representing the applicant. I'd just like to note that I've had a chance to review the staff report and the previous piece of public correspondence. I'm not sure if it's the same as the one that was identified by Ms. Stamen. I'll note that I agree with the recommendation of staff and the conditions of the proposed consents. And before, I thought I would make one comment as well, if that's permitted, just to acknowledge and sort of draw the committee's attention to the conditions of consent, in particular, condition number 7. So this is a property that's sufficiently sized that it's possible to sever 2 new lots from the existing property, effectively increasing the number of lots here from 1 to 3 within the permissions of the current zoning bylaw. So it's possible for each of the lots to meet the minimum lot area requirements of the zoning bylaw. And as shown on the concept plan that we've provided through the application, it's possible for the 2 newly created lots to have a sufficient building envelope to allow the construction of a new single attached house. But what the plan obviously isn't telling the full story of is that the property is currently designated has a heritage designation and is adjacent to another heritage property. So one of the components of this application was a heritage impact statement, which reviewed and made some recommendations about ensuring that the heritage value of the two existing homes to either side are maintained and conserved. And condition number 7, the development agreement condition, speaks to that a little bit. That condition will require that the recommendations from the heritage impact statement make their way into a development agreement, which would be registered on title. And there will be subsequent approvals for this process. This is for the development on each of these lots through heritage permitting and so on. So the detailed design of the homes that will be built on those properties and how the properties will be configured will be undertaken in the future, and there will be a public process for that, a heritage permit process. So a much more detailed and nuanced review will be undertaken at that point in time. But what this development agreement condition will do is that it will ensure that the future owners, whoever buys the property, one of the items that they would receive as part of the purchase of the property is whatever is registered on title. And this development agreement will be registered on title. So it's a way of also informing the future property owners that by purchasing this property, they're committing to maintaining that heritage design and heritage commitment, so that they know what they're getting into sort of right off the bat, right before they acquire the property. So I just wanted to make that note and sort of highlight that.
Good. Thank you very much. Thanks. Okay, so now I'll turn it over to the committee members. Do you have any questions for the applicant or for staff? And Vincent?
Yeah, so my question was about, it's kind of like the correspondence that we had received. So I read the bylaw, And it seems to be, it's only designated as architectural value or interest. So it doesn't really seem to be too much about like the heritage or the actual property. And about the entrance is in spacious ground. I interpreted that as the in front of the entrance was spacious. So I was just wondering about staff about what's the interpretation of this compared to what the letter was, and also if there's anything about the protection of these old trees that were on there that were also a concern. I was just wondering if there was anything about that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Staff? So we have the, who's our planner for that?
It's
Oh,
me
Lindsay.
here.
Yes.
I was just
Hi,
waiting
Lindsay.
to be unmuted there.
Yep.
So I can speak to both of those elements. The trees specifically were identified in the heritage impact statement that was provided. Now the recommendations of the heritage impact statement are being implemented through the development agreement, which is a condition of the consents. And just as a summary, the development agreement will contain something to the effect of a requirement to retain, enhance, and protect from harm during and after construction the existing vegetation and buffer between Lot 1 and 151 Union Street. You can find that on page 11 of the report. There's a list of the elements of the heritage impact statement that will be implemented in the development agreement, and the trees are referenced on number 6, as well as number 7, which speaks to the creation of a vegetative buffer, and number 8, which is a requirement to retain the yew hedge as much as possible.
Yep, very good. Thanks for that.
As to the second question, our heritage planner has signed off on this application. So he has reviewed the heritage bylaw, the heritage impact statement, and it was on his recommendation that we have implemented the condition for a development agreement. So coming from our heritage planner, the bylaws, heritage elements have been considered.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Any further questions from committee members? Okay, I don't see any. So now I'll open the public portion of the meeting. Are any members of the public here this evening to speak to the application for 163 Union Street? Please raise your virtual hand.
Mr. Chair, I do know we have speakers. Now, the speaker I'm going to allow now is Dr. Carl Bray. There's actually two separate people who are in the same meeting room. So one will speak, and then I believe it's Sarah Gibson Bray who will be speaking after. So we'll have two speakers under the same name.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So Dr. Bray, Carl Bray?
Yep, it's just taking me one moment to unmute him, sir.
Sure.
All right, so I'm just trying a different thing. I'm going to bring Dr. Bray directly into the meeting, and that may allow him to be unmuted more easily. Just one moment.
Okay, sure, certainly.
Okay,
Hello?
there you go. You're now live, Dr. Bray.
Yeah, actually, if it's possible, it's Sarah Gibson Bray. I'm on my husband, Dr. Bray's computer, but I'm the one who's created the submission. So I would like to speak first if possible. And then
Absolutely.
thank you so much. And my brother, John Gibson, I know is also hoping to make a comment. So thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the Committee of Adjustment and city staff. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to express my concerns about the proposed severance of two new separate residential lots on the 163 Union Street property. My name is Sarah Gibson Bray, and I am the co-owner with my brother John Gibson of 151 Union Street, the heritage designated family home, which is directly next door on the east side of 163 Union. Our grandparents, Wellington and Louise Kays Gibson, bought 151, as we know it, as newlyweds in 1912, And 108 years later, our family continues to live in and to love this old house. Both the unique and historic house and the lush, spacious garden at 151 Union Street mean a great deal to us. For this reason, we have serious reservations about the proposed severance of 2 new residential lots at 163 Union, both of which combined would abut the entire length of the western side of our 151 Union Street property and could radically change both properties. There are 3 principal causes for serious concerns about this proposal. The first issue relates to the avenue of large old trees which line and straddle the north-south boundary line between 151 Union and 163 Union. There are 5 very rare, very tall blackthorn locust trees, which were planted more than 100 years ago. These locusts have very tall trunks and large spreading shady canopies with similarly deep and wide root systems below the ground. Interspersed between the locusts are 7 maple trees ranging from medium to large in size, also with large rounded canopies and broad root systems. These trees provide shade, beauty, privacy, and fresh air to both existing properties. If a paved driveway and house with excavated foundation were to be constructed on this narrow lot number 1 that's proposed, both would impinge directly on the root systems of these trees and very likely kill the trees. These trees cannot be replaced in our lifetimes. Putting these trees into jeopardy runs directly against the City of Kingston's declaration of a climate emergency and its ensuing plan to reforest and greatly densify tree plantings throughout the city. Saying yes to lot number 1 could destroy this urban green space. Number 2, the second issue with the proposed lot number 1 development relates to traffic and public safety. I need to bring to the committee's attention a hidden but serious and illegal traffic phenomenon, which I have observed literally hundreds of times when I am working at 151 Union Street. Every day, hundreds of cars park across the street from 151 Union in 3 large Queens parking lots, 1 on the surface and 2 underground. Upon exiting these lots, cars entering onto Union Street are directed by a sign to turn right only and to drive to the east towards the downtown. Westbound cars are supposed to exit via the lower Albert Street exit only. 9 times out of 10, drivers ignore the sign and pull out across traffic to drive west on Union Street, directly in front of our house and what would be lot number 1. Union Street is a major traffic artery when you consider Queens and KGH traffic, 2 bike lanes, many pedestrians, KCBI students, skateboarders, city buses, and cars. The potential for accidents is very high. Where our driveways at 149 and 151 Union have an unobstructed view of the street both east and west, a new driveway at lot number 1 would have the large 7+ feet tall cedar hedge, it's not yew, it's actually cedar, of 163 Union, set in about 2 feet from the sidewalk, and the trees and bushes to the east to contend with, creating a blind or hidden driveway. With frequent cyclists riding on the sidewalk and many walkers on their phones and earbuds, a driveway here is an accident waiting to happen. Number 3, the third issue relates to privacy and light. In the planning staff report, clause E on page 8, it states, I quote, "The resulting lot and intended residential use will not result in adverse effects in terms of privacy, access to sunlight, and shadowing." And then further along in the document, item number 2 on page 11 refers to the allowable height of a new building on lot number 1 as no taller than 163 Union. To put my concern in context, there are 15 windows and glass doors at 151 Union Street which face to the west and take in at quite a distance the house, swimming pool, and rear garden at 163 Union. At 163 Union, there are 9 large windows and glass doors which face eastwards towards 151 Union. Privacy, light, and shadowing have never been an issue because of this ample space between these homes. A house built on the much narrower lot number 1, in full view of these 24 windows combined, would definitely reduce privacy for both 151 and 163. A new house on lot number 1 would in fact greatly diminish view and light at 163. The outlook could even be a blank wall. If the lot number 1 house were allowed to be as tall as 163 Union, which is much taller than 151, sunlight and privacy would be greatly reduced and shadowing would occur on both 151 and 163, given compromised morning and afternoon light from east and west respectively. For these reasons, we are opposed to the approval of the lot number 1 concept at 163 Union. With regards to the proposed lot number 2 on Albert Street, which also adjoins our back garden, we feel that it is a more feasible, less intrusive concept. Though it would also impact our environment, there are fewer trees on either property which would be affected in that area. And with only 3 small north-facing windows and a small built-on garage at the rear of 163, privacy could be largely retained if a house were built on the site of the existing 2-car garage building at 163. With regards to traffic on Albert Street, a driveway from lot number 2 would present far fewer hazards as there are no bike lanes or buses and it is a quieter side street. I thank the Committee of Adjustment for considering these comments and concerns, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, I think you also indicated that John Gibson is present. Is he with you on the same computer or is he in a separate room?
He has signed in separately.
For clarification, Mr. Chair, for clarification, I believe Dr. Bray is signed in on this line and he wishes to speak next as
Got it.
delegate.
Okay. Yes. So Dr.
Mr.
Bray.
Gibson.
Yep.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. Just further to the image that you just had up on the screen, I think if you look at the footprint of the proposed dwelling and adjacent driveway and garage for lot 1, it is almost right up against the eastern property line. If you juxtaposed the tree canopies of the existing mature trees along the eastern property line, they would overlap not only the driveway, but a large portion of the building envelope. In other words, you are going to kill those mature trees. Secondly, if you also notice the building envelope compared to the rear of the existing building at number 163, it leaves a comparatively small amount of room between the two. The proposals may meet the letter of the law in terms of the zoning bylaw, but they do not meet, in my opinion, the spirit of the existing dwelling at 163 and also at 151 for the reasons that both of these dwellings and also the related dwelling and property at 169 Union Street. These are all large villas on large properties. And unfortunately, the way that the bylaw is stated and the heritage impact statement is stated, they focus almost entirely on the buildings. They do not understand the context in its full extent. And that's why even in the designating bylaw, you have mention of spacious grounds. And to my opinion, spacious grounds refer to a villa in a generous landscape setting. So what you have at the entrance to Albert Street are 2 large villas at 169 and 163 as gate posts to Albert Street. So you have a deliberate design decision there made over 100 years ago. And unfortunately, in the reports that you have before you, that point isn't made. So I will now turn it over to my brother-in-law, John Gibson.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Gibson, when you're ready.
Mr. Chair, we'll just give Derek a moment to bring the next speaker forward.
Sure,
So
thanks.
just a moment here. Let me find. All right, Mr. Gibson, Mr. John Gibson is now live.
Thank you. Mr. Gibson.
Yes, thank you. I was having a little difficulty with my audio. Can you hear me now?
Can hear you fine. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. So I am a co-owner with my sister Sarah, who has spoken so eloquently, and I would just like to pick up on what my brother-in-law Carl Bray has said. I read with interest the designating bylaw for 163, and one of your members of your committee, I think, picked up on this, and it refers expressly as to the spacious grounds. It puts it in these terms. The most important feature of this symmetrical cream-colored stucco dwelling set in spacious grounds is the entranceway. Now, I think that that is of real significance. And you can see this from an aesthetic point of view if you look at in the heritage impact statement, figure 3, the photograph of the front of the property. You can see quite clearly there that the house is more or less centered on the property with very spacious grounds extending largely equally to the left towards Albert Street and to the right towards 151 Union Street, our property. The photograph doesn't quite show the full extent of the eastern grounds on which the proposed severance of Lot 1 would sit, but it is clear from the photograph that if a house was constructed on the eastern ground, this unique heritage feature would be lost. The symmetry of the property would be destroyed, and that's clear from Foten's concept plan. The spacious grounds would be eliminated. I'd also like to point out to you that the heritage impact statement itself on page aspect of properties.
Excuse me, Mr. Gibson, you just blanked out for about 5 seconds. Could you just go back half a sentence?
Yes, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. My internet connection seems to be not as good as it might be. So what I was saying is that the heritage impact statement on page 163 also recognizes the importance of the landscape aspect of the property in the heritage context. And it refers to the Queen's University Heritage study and refers to the property across the street, across Albert Street at 169 Union on the northwest corner, and references there the mature landscape and prominent corner site. And then just below, when it refers to our property, 151 Union Street, it refers to its prototypical interior or craftsman interior features and its siting in a large landscape yard as important design elements. And so what we really have here is one property, the one at issue, the applicant's property at 163 in the center of 2 other properties. And together, each of these properties is flanked by large gardens. And in my respectful submission, if the committee allows the severance and the proposed development of 2 buildings on the 163 property, this feature of the property, which is an integral part of its heritage designation, clear from the bylaw itself, and the heritage context of the adjacent properties, 169 and 151, will be destroyed. Now, I agree with my sister that this is particularly true of the effect of severing the proposed Lot 1. And if the committee is inclined to permit a severance, it should only, in my respectful submission, allow a severance of Lot 2 to the north.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mr. Gibson.
I have just one further point, if you might indulge me for a moment.
Absolutely, yes.
Yes, I want to draw your attention to a couple of things. Vis-a-vis the impact on the trees, you can see, now the photographs are somewhat limited, but in reviewing the materials, page 156 in Exhibit F, the site photos, the bottom photograph is looking north across Union Street, and you can see there beside the cedar hedge towards the right part of that photograph. You can see the trees, and although they're bare of leaves in this photograph, they're extensive, they're big, and their envelope is extensive and would certainly drop well over where the proposal is for a paved driveway and a building. This is also evident in the photograph. Well, you can't see the photograph at 157, but you can also on page 176, figure 7, the view south from the pool gives a clear indication of the extent to which these trees, some of which are on our property and some which are right down the property line, overhang onto the area that is part of proposed lot number 1. I just want to draw your attention to one further photograph, which gives you a pretty good illustration of the traffic issue, which Sarah has described so well. And that is the photograph, the aerial photograph on page 154, which shows the existing Queens parking lot entrance. And so a severance of lot 1 will place another driveway almost directly across from the exit from the Queens parking lot. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to address this important issue.
Thank you very much. So are there any other members of the public who wish to speak to the application for 163 Union Street? Please raise your virtual hand. I'm not seeing any. I'll call a third and final time. Are there any members of the public here this evening who wish to speak to the application for 163 Union Street? Please raise your virtual hand. And I don't see any. So what I'll do is I'll come back actually to the applicant and staff to address the questions that have been raised. Mr. Leclerc.
Excuse me. Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, I'd like to thank the members of the public for coming out and speaking tonight and providing those comments. I will try and address the comments in the order that they were provided. The concerns about the trees along the property line and excavation for the proposed for a dwelling on the severed lot, as well as for the driveway. I'd like to note that one of the elements in the way that the concept plan for the proposed lot 1 was developed is based on sort of how can this lot be configured so as to minimize its heritage impact? Again, at a very conceptual level, which is where we are at this stage for the development of that lot. And the reason that the house was situated along the western portion of that lot, one is because it's as far away from the existing tree line as possible. And second is because there is already that existing in-ground excavated pool in that location. So the amount of excavation, of new excavation required in order to accommodate this new house is as little as it needs to be. So that's that comment. In terms of the concerns regarding traffic and public safety, certainly those are concerns that we share insofar as that's something that we want to avoid in the development of this lot. No one is interested in creating a lot that's unsafe or in an unsafe location. City staff, engineering staff, as noted in the staff report, reviewed the proposed lot and the configuration of the driveway and didn't raise any traffic concerns. So their traffic experts at the city didn't feel that was an additional concern. Of course, when a driveway is proposed, the applicant at that particular stage, whoever that is, it would be a future owner of that lot, will have to go through an entrance permit process. So there will be an engineering review of the entrance as well. In terms of the privacy and light loss, again, I feel that it's very important to note that the proposed dwelling envelope is in an area where zoning currently allows. So the zoning allows the setbacks that are proposed. The building's situated so that the existing vegetation along the eastern lot line would be maintained to the extent possible. And obviously that's an important component of the heritage recommendation and would be reflected in the development agreement as noted by Ms. Stamen previously. So there's enough separation there that it can meet zoning, which is one of the factors in the zoning bylaw setbacks is to maintain that level of separation. But I'll also note that I'm not going to say that there's not going to be any change in privacy. I think this is an urban area, and it's quite typical that in an urban environment such as this, where houses can be a little bit closer together, there's going to be a little bit of that overlook from one property to another. And what we try and strive to do is to minimize the degree to which it's intrusive. So the overlook here by meeting the setbacks is not going to be intrusive. It'll just be consistent with what you might find in an urban environment of this nature. Similarly with the light lots, the scale of the houses is completely permitted within the building envelope of the zoning bylaw. With respect to the trees killed, again, this is one of those comments that I agree with. I agree that the intent here is to minimize and avoid the damage to the existing tree line, because it is such an important privacy characteristic, but also an important heritage one. And on page 145 and 146 of the agenda package, this is the pages that Ms. Stamen referred to earlier. There's a summary there, points 1 through 8, of the criteria that the development agreement will need to include with respect to implementing the recommendations from the Heritage Impact Statement. And there's a few recommendations here that deal with requirement to preserve that tree line. So as part of the heritage permit process, what I would anticipate is that any future owner of that property, when they seek to construct a house and go through the required heritage permit process, they'll have to undertake a tree inventory of some type to identify what's the health of the trees, what's the condition of the trees along that tree line, what are the species, and provide recommendations for tree preservation there as well, and which would potentially have an impact on the building envelope and the location of the driveway. So it's possible that that detailed review in a future stage is going to result in additional constraints on the development of this lot that we don't know at this time. What the requirement for the development agreement and that future heritage permit does is that it ensures that that detailed review happens at the appropriate time. With respect, I think there were two comments sort of back to back having to do with the large villas, the designating bylaw, which speaks to spacious grounds in the heritage context. So I'll speak first briefly to the adjacent properties. So 151, 163, and then 169 Union Street. The heritage impact statement that was prepared through this assessment, through this application and reviewed by the city's heritage planning staff concluded that there wouldn't be any negative heritage impacts to 169 Union Street. That's the property on the across the road on Albert Street. And secondly, it concluded that by implementing the heritage recommendations, there would not be a negative impact to 151 Union Street. So what's critical here is that the heritage consultant did not say there's not going to be a negative impact. What the heritage consultant said was, if these recommendations are implemented, there won't be a negative impact. And what the layers of implementation and sort of regulation that go through here, the development agreement, the heritage permit process do is that they ensure that those heritage recommendations will be implemented specifically to conserve the heritage value of the existing properties. With respect to the spacious grounds, I respectfully disagree with the interpretation that has been presented this evening, and I agree with the interpretation that's presented in the staff report. This is on page 146, where the city's heritage planner effectively agreed with the heritage consultant and that prepared the heritage impact statement in support of the application. So there's a consideration at the top of this page about what the spacious grounds means and how it's reflected in the bylaw. I'm not going to read the statement. It is right there for everyone to see. So this is the interpretation that's been put forth by the city's heritage planner, and I do agree with it. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for putting that up. So that first paragraph there discusses spacious grounds and where that term comes from in the designating bylaw, and concludes that though the oversized lot and the landscaping are not pivotal heritage attributes for 163 Union Street. So I think that's just important to note as just another opinion that's been presented this evening. And finally, with respect to the tree impact, I think I've spoken to that a little bit. There's that will be reflected in the development agreement and will be considered again in detail through the heritage permit process, which a future property owner would be required to undertake after the acquisition of this parcel.
Okay, thank you very much. Anything else or anything else to add?
Thank you. No, unless I missed a question, Mr. Chair, that's all I have.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Thank you very much. All right. Well, I guess at this point, thank you very much for the responses. I'll turn it back to the, I guess, committee for, oh, I see Mr. Babin, you have a question?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to defer this item to our June meeting to give me an opportunity to take the comments from the neighbors, the Brays, and sorry, I forget the other gentleman's name, as well as Mr. Leclerc's comments. Given that this is a contentious application and we're under sort of a lockdown sort of scenario, I did not get an opportunity to visit the site. And I know where the site is, but I would like to defer this to our June meeting, which I believe is June 15th. So that's
okay. Yeah, if I could just add to that as well, I did drive by yesterday, and after seeing it on site and then hearing Dr. Bray's comment, specifically the comment that he talks about the spirit of the fabric of the neighborhood and what the planners really intended over 100 years ago, and then taking a closer look at what's here, I personally as well, I think would like a bit more time to digest what's been presented and what we've heard, and take a closer look at the documentation we have. So I'd certainly support that.
Thank you.
So Vincent? Yeah, you raised your hand, Vincent.
There's a lot to take in here, and I guess like a more thorough site visit would probably be beneficial too.
Okay. All right. So Derek, how would we proceed? Would we just create a new motion, or do we just motion to defer?
Mr. Chair, it would be helpful if you move the motion to get it on the floor, and then if a member wanted to bring forward a motion to defer at the time, that would be appropriate.
Okay. All right. So we'll need a motion, I guess, to approve, right? And then we amend that. Okay. So Vincent or Paul? Somebody want to move? Okay, Paul?
Yeah.
Yep, Paul?
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't think it should be a motion to approve. I think it should be a motion to defer. And I'm putting a motion to defer this application to our June 15th meeting.
Okay, that's fine. And do we have a seconder for that? All right, seconded by Vincent. Any more discussion on that? So all in favor, raise your hand. And that's unanimously carried. So we'll so it's only being deferred to the June meeting. I don't have the date in front of me, but yeah, we'll put that on the record for the June.
I believe it's June 22nd.
June 22nd. Okay. Okay. All right. So thank you very much for that. Yes.
Mr. Chair, at this point, if you could put up Anne Marie's email address again, it would probably be helpful for interested members of the public to send an email to that address so they can follow up and be kept in the loop on any developments regarding this file.
Sure. Okay, and if you are going to be sending an email to Anne Marie, be sure to include your name, your address, and the file number of the application. Okay. All right, so now we'll move on to, thanks very much for that. The applicants, you're free to leave the meeting now at this point, and the public members as well. So now we'll move on to agenda item number 7G, which is an application for minor variance. Anna Marie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. The next application for minor variance is D13005-2020 at 628 Johnson Street. The owner is Janani Sivakumar and the applicant is Heather Sorella. The purpose and effect of the application is to reduce exterior side yard setback requirements to accommodate a deck projection with a covered porch for access purposes and increase the maximum allowable building depth requirements to accommodate a second residential unit. I leave this in your hands.
Thank you. And you'll find this on page 209 of the PDF package for this. So if we have the applicant and or their agent here, could I please have you identify yourself by name and address, please?
Sure, Mr. Chair, I believe Mr. Tao is also representing this file.
Good, okay.
All right, so again, my name is Mark Tao. I'm a planner with IBI Group. I believe that Heather is also here to represent the file. So either of us should be able to speak to the application.
Okay, very good. Anything else you want to add to it at this point?
Nope, not at this time. Thank you.
Okay, good. So committee members, I'll ask you, do you have any questions of the applicant or the staff? I don't see any at all. So I'll now open the public portion of the meeting. Are there any members of the public here to speak to the application for 628 Johnson Street? Are there any public or members of the public here this evening who wish to speak to the application for 628 Johnson Street? I'm not seeing any, but I'll call for a third and final time. If anybody's here to speak to the application for 628 Johnson Street, please raise your virtual hand. And I don't see any, so I'll now close the public portion of the meeting and come back to the committee for a decision. So Vincent? Yeah, are you moving, Vincent? Okay, so procedurally, Derek, should we physically say what the motion is?
I don't believe that's necessary. I think as long as people raise their hand and you as chair recognize a mover and a seconder out loud, we should be fine.
Okay, good. All right, so I recognize that the motion is being moved by Vincent and seconded by Paul. Any discussion? So all in favor, raise your physical hand, and that's unanimously carried. And that's it. Thank you. So the applicant can leave at this point. Thank you for attending. Okay, the next application is number 7H, which is an application for consent, new lot and a minor variance. Anna Marie, could I have you introduce this?
Thank you. The file number is D10004-2020 and D13002-2020. The address is 1270 John F. Scott Road. The owners Philip and William Thompson, also the applicant. The purpose and effect of the applications is for consent to sever a residential lot and minor variance to reduce the road frontage of the retained lot. The application is to sever a 2-hectare parcel of land with 90 meters of road frontage on John F. Scott Road and is located at the southeast corner of the lot. Retained 10.8 hectare parcel of land will have 63 meters of road frontage on John F. Scott Road and will remain as agricultural lands. The application for minor variance is to request relief to reduce the minimum road frontage requirement of 90 meters to 63 meters to recognize the frontage of the retained lot. I leave this in your hands.
Great, and you'll find the this application starts on page 261 of the PDF package. So if we have the applicant or their agent here, can I please have you identify yourself by name and address? And I see Vanessa Thompson.
Yep. Hi, Vanessa Thompson here, and it's 1270 John F. Scott Road.
Good. Okay, and do you have anything further you wish to add to the application this evening?
No, nothing to add. Thanks.
Okay, so I'll now turn it over to the committee members. Do you have any questions for the applicant or for staff? And I don't see any at all. All right, so I'll now open the public portion of the meeting. Are any members of the public here this evening to speak to 1270 John F. Scott Road? Please raise your virtual hand. Are any members of the public here to speak to the application for 1270 John F. Scott Road? Please raise your virtual hand. And my third and final call, are any members of the public here this evening to speak to the application for 1270 John F. Scott Road? I don't see any, so I'll close the public portion of the meeting and now come back to the committee members for a decision. Okay, Paul, moved by Paul. So I recognize that the motion is moved by Paul and seconded by Vincent. Any discussion on that? So all in favor, raise your hand, and that's carried. Thank you very much. And the applicants are free to leave the meeting. All right, our next application is agenda item number 7I, which is an application for permission and consent, an easement. Anna Marie, could I have you introduce this, please?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, these are two files, application for permission and consent for file number D10-014-2020, D10-015-2020, D10-016-2020, and D13-060-2019. This is for 29 Rideau Street. The owner is 2643573 Ontario Limited. The applicant is Photon Consultants and Brian Stone and Associate Designers. The purpose and effect of the application is to amend zoning bylaw 96-259 to permit the expansion of an existing legal non-conforming use, to allow for the renovation and expansion of the existing townhouse dwelling unit that will occupy the second and third floor, and the incorporation of a second residential unit in the ground floor and lower level walkout, which will result in one principal unit and one second residential unit in an existing legal non-conforming residential building. Easements are required for access to the parking for the second residential units. I leave this in your hands.
Thank you. And so this application starts on page 290 of the PDF package. So do we have an applicant here or their agent to speak to this application today? I see Steve Mann.
Yes, sir. That's me. I'm the president of the numbered company in question.
Okay. And is there anything? Oh, and we also have Brian Stone.
I believe Mr. Yuko Leclerc from Photon is also present as the agent.
Right, and Mr. Yuko Leclerc. Okay, so do any of you have anything further you wish to add to the application this evening?
Good evening, Mr. Chair. This is Yuko Leclerc speaking from Photon. I'd just like to note that this application and the next one, item J on the agenda, are presented hand in hand. They're both presented more or less concurrently. The intention here is to expand the interior of the building and to allow secondary suites in each of the townhouse units, as well as to expand the rear of 29 Rideau, build an addition and a deck, and to have that addition allow include a rooftop deck above it as well, to provide just a little bit more amenity space and a nice entrance at the back. It's proposed to add a parking space to each of the new lots at the rear. This is a zoning bylaw requirement. These are properties that benefit from legal non-conforming status. They're in the downtown and harbor zoning bylaw, which requires ground floor commercial as a use. So these from a zoning bylaw perspective, a townhouse, a fully residential building in each of these properties is illegal non-conforming. So by asking to allow the expansion, both in terms of adding a secondary suite as well as the internal expansion, a little bit more a living space is going to be generated the application for permission is triggered and required. So the new parking spaces would be proposed at the rear for the secondary suites. And the parking spaces, as can be seen on this plan, and I appreciate it, Derek, for sharing this plan provided, the sort of the hatched area leading into the rear area, the rear of these two properties comes in off of Rideau Street, and that takes advantage of existing rights of way. So the 27 Rideau Street, for example, it's a property that currently has a rear parking area that uses a right of way over 19 Rideau Street and 23 Rideau Street. So the proposed rights of way for 29 and 31 Rideau Street would be along the exact same dimension as that existing right of way. So no new physical changes would be required, at least on those properties, to facilitate that right of way. But of course, the legal right would be extended to these two properties at 29 and 31. And you can see more or less how those rights of way would kind of provide access to the rear parking areas on those properties. So it's one of those applications where there's a lot of file numbers. It looks like there's a lot going on, but really it's a pretty straightforward one. But of course, if there's any questions from the committee or from the public, I'm happy to help answer them.
Very good. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so at this point, I'll turn it over to the committee members. Do you have any questions for the applicant or for staff? No, I'm seeing none at all. Okay, so we'll open up the public portion of the meeting. Are any members of the public here to speak for the application for 29 Rideau Street?
Mr. Chair, if I can just interrupt, we lost Mr. Babin here. So we'll be required to take a brief recess until he returns to ensure we have quorum.
Hey, James,
Okay.
Mr. Babin is still on my screen.
Yep, I still see him too.
You may have changed the view on your monitor, but he is still here, both virtually.
Yeah.
Well, pardon my ignorance.
That's not ignorant at all. That's great. We're glad to have you, Paul. Okay, so on that, I think so we'll open the public portion of the meeting. So are any members of the public here this evening to speak to the application for 29 Rideau Street? Please raise your virtual hand. Are there any members of the public here this evening to speak to the application for 29 Rideau Street? Please raise your virtual hand. And I'm going to make one third and final call. Are there any members of the public here this evening who wish to speak to the application for 29 Rideau Street? Please raise your virtual hand. And I'm not seeing any, so I'll come back to the committee for a motion, a decision. So Vincent, moved by Vincent. Okay, and seconded by Paul. Any discussion on that? None at all. So all in favor, raise your hand. And that's unanimously carried as well. Thank you. And thanks to the applicants, you're free to leave the room now. All right, so the next application we have is number 7J, which is an application for permission and consent, an easement. Anna Marie, could I have you take this over?
Yes, thank you. This application ties in with the previous application for 29 Rideau Street. It's file number D10-014-2020, D10-015-2020, D10-016-2020, and D13-061-2019. It is for 31 Rideau Street. The owner is 2643573 Ontario Limited. The applicant is Photon Consultants and Brian Stone and Associate Designers. The purpose and effect of the application is to amend the zoning bylaw to permit the expansion of an existing legal non-conforming use to allow for the renovation and expansion of the existing townhouse dwelling unit that is proposed to ultimately occupy the second and third floor, and the incorporation of a second residential unit in the ground floor and lower level walkout, resulting in one principal unit and one second residential unit in the existing legal non-conforming residential building. Easements are required for access to the parking for the second residential units. I leave this in your hands.
Thank you very much. And you'll find this on page 334 of the PDF agenda package. So if we have the applicant here, I do believe we have the applicants and their agents here. For the record, we'll have you identify yourselves again by name and address, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is actually Yuko Leclerc again from
Okay.
FO10, Planning and Design, representing the applicant. Just like to note that, again, I've reviewed the staff report. I didn't mention this in the previous one, but this applies to that one as well. Reviewed the staff report, agree with the recommendations therein. I'll note that one of the differences on this application from the other one is that the proposed, one of the proposed changes to the building here is to introduce a new dormer on the top floor at 31 Rideau and a dormer at the rear, both of which would be consistent with the ones that are existing and proposed at 29 Rideau. If there's any questions about that difference in particular, I'm happy to speak to that.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that. And so now I'll ask the committee members, do you have any questions for the applicant, their agent, or for staff? And I'm seeing two heads shaking no. So what I'll do is I'll open the public portion of the meeting. Is anybody here this evening to speak to the application for 31 Rideau Street? Please raise your virtual hand. So 31 Rideau Street, do we have any members of the public here to speak to the application this evening? And I'll call for one third and final time. Are there any members of the public with us this evening who wish to speak to the application for 31 Rideau Street? Please raise your virtual hand. And I see none, so we'll close the public portion of the meeting and come back to the committee for a motion and decision. So Paul, moved by Paul, okay, and seconded by Vincent. So the chair recognizes that it's been moved by Paul and seconded by Vincent. Any discussion? No? Okay, so all in favor, raise your hands, and that would be carried. Thank you very much. And the applicant is free to leave the meeting. All right, the next item on the agenda is number 7K, which is an application for minor variance. Anna Marie, if I could please have you introduce this for us.
Yes, the file number is D13-058-2019. It's for 3 Drummond Street for a minor variance, and the owner is Catherine Burke, and the applicant is Mark Peabody and Todd Biggerman. The application is to construct a 2-story rear addition onto the existing dwelling. The effect is to increase the maximum lot coverage, to reduce the minimum interior side yard, and to reduce the minimum rear yard depth. The total area of the proposed rear addition is 6.5 square meters. I leave this in your hands.
Thank you very much. And for anybody following along, you can access this on page 378 of the PDF package. So if we have the applicant or their agent here with us this evening, can I please have you identify yourself by name and address? And I see Todd Biggerman.
Yes, my name is Todd Biggerman. I'm the applicant for the client for the project at 3 Drummond.
Okay. Great. All right. Thank you very much. And is there anything further you'd like to add to the application before us, Mr. Biggerman?
Nope, not at this time.
Okay. So on that note, then I'll come to our committee members and I'll ask if they have any questions for the applicant or for staff. So Paul?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I recall, this property is in the Berryfields Heritage area, and I'm wondering if there's been any comments from the Berryfield Homeowners Association or from any of the neighbors about this project. Thank you.
Anna Marie, do you want to speak to that?
Thank you for the question. Through you, Mr. Chair, we have not received any correspondence or correspondence from any of the homeowners within the Berryfield area. Just for your information, this went through Heritage Kingston for approval, and approval was received for the rear addition and also the deck at the rear of the property. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions from members of the committee? Okay, so on that note, I'll open the public portion of the meeting. Do we have any members of the public here this evening to speak to the application for 3 Drummond Street? If so, please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. I'll call for a second time. Do we have any members of the public here who wish to speak to the application for 3 Drummond Street? Please raise your virtual hand. And a third and final call, any members of the public here with us this evening to speak to the application for 3 Drummond Street, please raise your virtual hand. And I don't see any, so I'll come back to the committee for a motion. So Paul, moved by Paul and seconded by Vincent. Any discussion on that? So all in favor, raise your hands. And that's unanimously carried. Thank you very much. And Mr. Bigeman, you're free to leave the meeting now. All right, our next agenda item is number 7I, which is an application for a minor variance. Anna Marie, could I have you take this over, please?
Yes, certainly. This is an application for a minor variance. It's file number D13012-2020 for 1525 Clover Street. The owner is Virgil Marcus Construction Limited, and the applicant is Scott Arnold. Purpose and effect of the application is to decrease the required rear yard to construct a 1-story single detached dwelling with a secondary suite in the basement. I leave this in your hands.
Thank you very much. And you can find this on page 406 of the PDF agenda package. So if we have the applicant or their agent here this evening, can I please have you identify yourself by name and address?
Hey, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, good.
Yep.
It's Scott Arnold. I represent VMarks Construction, an employee of VMarks Construction.
Okay.
And I do not at this time have anything to add. However, our client, Mr. Peter Spurl, is present. Should there be any questions as well, he's here to answer.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, so I'll turn it over to the members of the committee. Do you have any questions for the applicant or staff? And I'm not seeing any, so I'll now go down to the public portion of the meeting, open the public portion of the meeting.
Mr. Chair, we have both members of the committee have raised their hand. Actually, they were just a little late on the draw.
Oh, sorry, my bad. All right, so I'll just go back here. Vincent, I see you're here first. Comments, questions?
Yeah, so my comment was somebody had an issue with increased parking and traffic and things. So there is in the document or in the file, it states that there will be a parking for the addition in the driveway. And is that going to be sufficient, I guess, for the planner? And is it for like an income property for many people, or is it just like for a single family or something like that?
Okay, so who would be addressing that? Would it be Mr. Arnold? Did you want to speak to that?
Mr. Chair, Ms. Robideau had her hand up. I just lowered it too quickly for you.
Oh, okay. So Megan?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Megan Robideau. I'm the planner with the City of Kingston on this file. In regards to the correspondence that was received from the neighbor and those concerns raised regarding parking and traffic, there are 2 parking spaces proposed with the proposed development, which would satisfy the requirements of the zoning bylaw in regards to parking for the primary and the secondary dwelling proposed on site. In terms of the occupancy, the proposed occupancy of the site, I believe Mr. Arnold's client is Kingston Community Living. And so they are proposing to house their clients within the site.
Okay, thank you for that. And Mr. Arnold, do you have something further to add to that?
Yes, I just wanted to state the concern about the parking. It does conform to as Megan had referred to, the requirements of zoning. nothing unlike all the secondary suites that are in the area and adjacent to this property and behind this property. Secondly, because it is Kingston Community Living, parking will be limited only to the staff. Obviously, the residents will not be using vehicles. So that's a non-issue with the residents, and it is simply staff that would be parking.
Okay, very good, thanks. Okay, Mr. Babin.
Well, I think, Mr. Chair, my question was really answered. It was about parking, what the intended use of the facility would be. So thank you.
Okay, good. All right, so no other questions from committee members? All right, at this point, I'll open the public portion of the meeting. So do we have any members of the public here this evening who wish to speak to the application for 1525 Clover Street? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. So are there any members of the public who wish to speak to the application for 1525 Clover Street? I'd ask that you raise your virtual hand in Zoom. And my third and final call, if we have any members here this evening who wish to speak to the application for 1525 Clover Street, please raise your virtual hand. And I see none, so I'm going to close the public portion of the meeting and come back to the committee members for a motion. So Vincent, moved by Vincent and seconded by Paul. Any discussion on that? So all in favor, raise your hands, and that would be carried. Thank you very much. So the applicant is certainly free to leave the meeting. All right, so our next file or item number is number 7M, which is an application for minor variance. Anna Marie, could I have you take over?
Yes, this is an application for a minor variance, file number D13-007-2020. The address is 363 College Street. The owner is Frank Armstrong and Julie Smith, and the applicant is Ashley Osmer. Purpose and effect of the application is to permit an expansion to the existing garage and foyer and to construct a second-story addition above the enlarged garage and foyer. Second story will contain a second residential unit. I leave this in your hands.
Thank you. And you'll find this on page 430 of the agenda package this evening. So if we have the applicant or their agent here this evening, can I please have you identify yourself by name and address? And I see Ashley Osmar.
Hi, yeah, I'm Ashley Osmar with NBS Design Group, and I'm representing the owners.
Okay. All right. Is there anything further you wish to add to the application?
No, thank you. That was great.
Okay, very good. I'll turn it now over to the committee members. Do you have any questions for the agent or for staff? No, and I see both people shaking their heads, so that's a no. So I'll now open the public portion of the meeting. Do we have any members of the public here this evening who wish to speak to the application for 363 College Street? Please raise your virtual hand. I'm not seeing any. So do we have any members of the public who wish to speak to the application for 363 College Street? Please raise your virtual hand. And finally, my third and final call, any members of the public here to speak to the application for 363 College Street, please raise your virtual hand. And I see none, so I'll close the public portion of the meeting and come back to the committee for a motion. So moved by Vincent and seconded by Paul. And any discussion? No, so all in favor, raise your hands, and that's carried. Thank you very much. And so the applicants are free to leave the meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, so our next our agenda item is number 7N, which is an application for a minor variance and consent. And Anna Marie, I'll pass this on to you.
Thank you. The application is for minor variance and consents for file numbers D10-013-2020 and D13-011-2020. The address is 28 Maitland Street. The owners are James and Helen Mathers. The applicant is Foten Consultants. Purpose and effect of the application is to sever an existing lot into 2 lots along a proposed common party wall while retaining the existing building. The request to sever requires technical variances to recognize multiple non-complying regulations and the resulting lot fabric. The consent proposal also requires multiple easements to address parking and access concerns. I leave this in your hands.
Thank you very much. And you'll note that the pages that were included with the agenda package have been superseded by the addendum that we all received, numbered 1 to 38. So I'll draw your attention to that. So if we have the applicant or their agent here, can I please have you identify your name and address for the record? And I see Mr. Leclerc.
Good evening, and thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, with Photon Planning and Design, representing the applicants, James and Ann Mathers, who are in the room this evening. And I just wanted to note that. Mr. Chair, this is an application. I don't have anything particularly to add to the summary from Ms. Eusebio, but I did want to note that I've reviewed the staff report, agree with the recommendation. I also wanted to note that this committee has a lot of experience reviewing and varying Kingston's many bylaws, including some of these older bylaws. This is one of those that's even more exceptional in that sense, being dated to 1959. So there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of detailed review with city staff. So I'd like to thank city staff for their help in sort of picking through this old bylaw and in finding which variances were needed in order to allow this application to proceed. I'll also note that the overall intent here, this is a building that has most recently housed 6 residential units, and the goal is to reduce the number of units from 6 down to 2, but to increase the number of properties from 1 to 2. So severing along the common party wall and providing mutual access easements for pedestrian access as well as for parking. And with that, Mr. Chair, if there's any questions from this committee or from the public, I'm happy to assist.
Very good. Thank you very much for that. So I'll turn it to the committee. Do you have any questions for the applicant or for staff? No, I see 2 shaking heads. So I'll now open the public portion of the meeting. Do we have any members of the public here this evening who wish to speak to the application for 28 Mahlon Street? If you do, could you please raise your virtual hand in Zoom? And if any members of the public here this evening wish to speak to the application for 28 Mahlon Street, please raise your virtual hand. And I'll call one third and final time. If there are any members of the public here this evening who wish to speak to the application for 28 Mahlon Street, please raise your virtual hand. And seeing none, I'll close the public portion of the meeting and come back to the committee members for a motion. So Paul, moved by Paul and seconded by Vincent. Any discussion on that? I see none. So all in favor, raise your hands. And opposed? Opposed? Just to confirm, Vincent, opposed or in favor? Oh, could you get his mic going there, Derek?
Yeah, it was in favor. I think there was a delay in my camera.
Oh, delay in the camera. Okay, all right. Okay, so we just to note, so we've it's moved by. Okay, so that's unanimously carried. Thank you very much. So to the applicant, you're certainly free to leave the meeting.
Thank you very much.
Okay. And it looks like we're down to our final application, which is item number O, application for minor variance. So Anna Marie, could I have you take this over?
Thank you. This is a minor variance for file number D13006 2020. The address is 1469 Princess Street. The owner is 1652557 Ontario Incorporated, and the applicant is Robert Paz. The purpose and effect of the application is to increase the maximum permitted office size per building from 605 meters square to 1822 meters square. This is to recognize the existing 1,300 square meters of office space and allow the remaining 521 square meters to be rented as office space if there is a market demand for it. I leave this in your hands.
Thank you very much. And you'll find this on page 488 of the agenda package this evening. So if we have the applicant or their agent here this evening, can I please have you identify yourself by name and address? So Mr. Paz.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nice to see you. Yes, I'm Robert Paz. Our office is at 541 Days Road.
Okay, is there anything further you wish to add to the application this evening?
No, thank you. Not at this time.
Okay, all right. So I'll turn this now over to the committee members. Do you have any questions for the applicant or for staff? No, I see two shaking heads. So I'll now open the public. Oh, Paul, did you have a question? No, you do? Okay, so I'll go back to you, Paul.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm having problems with my mouse.
Okay.
I was just a little confused by the application, and it seems like the footprint of the structure is remaining the same, but it's basically the use of the building, if you will, to almost fully to office space. I just wonder if staff could speak to this just a little more clearly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Lindsay.
Hello. Yes, so I can speak to that more fully. Perhaps it would be useful for us to put up Exhibit H as well. That's the floor plan of the building that shows the units. So there is no proposed changes to the building or the lot. What's being proposed here is to allow more office space in the existing building. Currently, offices are permitted use in the zone, but they are limited to 605 meters squared per building. This proposal, the 1822, that's the total floor area of the entire building.
Okay, that's helpful. I just wasn't, when I saw that drawing, it has current occupants in there as well, and some of them might not be typical offices, and I'm just wondering what the intent of the variance was. Thank you.
Good. Thanks for that. Any further questions from the committee members? No, I see none. Okay, so I'll now open the public portion of the meeting. Do we have any members of the public here this evening who wish to speak to the application for 1469 Princess Street? Please raise your virtual hand. And do we have members of the public here this evening who wish to speak to the application for 1469 Princess Street? Please raise your virtual hand. I'm not seeing any, but I'll call a third and final time. If you're interested in speaking to the application for 1469 Princess Street, please raise your virtual hand. And I see none, so I'll close the public portion of the meeting and come back to the committee members for a decision. So moved by Vincent and seconded by Paul. Any discussion? None. So all in favor, raise your hands. And that's carried. Great. Thank you very much. So the applicant is free to leave.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Eusebio has raised her hand and wishes to speak.
Yes, Anne-Marie.
Hi there. Good evening again. It's just come to our attention with regards to the applications for 29 Rideau Street and 31 Rideau Street. It is an administrative clarification that I just wanted to bring forward as shown in the agenda. It's shown as 2643573 Ontario Limited as the owner, when in fact it should be Stephen M. Mann Medicine Professional Corporation. I just wanted to acknowledge that. The notice of decisions for both applications will reflect this information. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. Okay, so that's it for the agenda items. So I have no notices of motion, which is agenda item number 8. Under number 9, it's the delegated authority under new business. Have you had a chance to review the delegated authority applications? Do you have any questions or concerns or comments? No, I don't see any at all. Okay. And item number 10 is correspondence. So we've already been provided with correspondence as they related to the application. So, and there's no additional correspondence for us tonight. Agenda item number 11 is a confirmation of the minutes. So we're going to need a motion to approve the minutes of the February 24th meeting. Okay, so Vincent, moved by Vincent and seconded by Paul. Any discussion on that? So all in favor, raise your hands. And that's unanimously carried. Okay, the date of the next meeting, just to be sure, is for May the 11th, 2020. It's not May the 25th. So it's going to be on May the 11th, and you'll be getting your agenda package and such in the mail. So that's it. So I want to thank everybody again, staff, for making this just so seamless. I mean, working behind the scenes, it's actually a lot of fun. I certainly enjoyed it along the way. Thanks for all the hard work that you've put in. I think you guys have done an amazing job. And again, I appreciate how Harriet is behind the lines, making sure all of this runs right. And you guys did a great job. So now I'm going to call for a motion to adjourn. So moved by Paul and seconded by Vincent, and all in favor, raise your hands. And that's unanimously carried. So we've adjourned at 7:29 p.m. Thanks, everybody, and see you, I'm presumably through Zoom in another couple of weeks. All right. Thanks again.